Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining this DevOps.com roundtable. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. Before we dive into our panel today, I have just a couple of notes to review with everyone. First off, as always, today's session is being recorded and will be made available on demand after we conclude today. Please send in your questions using the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. And feel free to join us in the chat by letting us know from where in the world you're tuning in from. Finally, we will select 2 of our most engaged attendees today to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So be sure to send in your chats, send in your questions, and fill out our post-webinar survey that is found in the resources panel on the left side of your screen, but I'll post the link in the chat toward the end of our program. So to dive into today's topic, we'll be discussing operationalizing AI in DevOps workflows. I'm joined today by Justin Saborin, Senior Systems Engineer at Roku. We're also joined by Joel Thomas, Director of Data and AI at Databricks. We're also joined by Stephanie Nagy, Customer Success at Glean. And from our very own repertoire, we have Mitch Ashley, CTO at Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. And keeping the train on the tracks, we've got our very own Mike Vizard, Chief Content Officer here at Techstrong Group. So Justin, Joel, Stephanie, and Mitch, thank you all for joining us for this panel today. Mike, I'm going to pass on over to you to dive us right in.
All right, folks, welcome everybody. We're talking about AI and DevOps workflows, and we're going to take this in 2 parts. We're going to first talk about, well, what exactly is AI and DevOps, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what's required to enable it, because it takes a fair amount of data engineering, and as we all know, these days, if we're doing anything in IT, it takes a village. So a village is assembled here for your question and answer session, so feel free to reach out, please, and use the Q&A in the chat. Ask as many questions as you like, and we'll get them all routed to the appropriate folks as we go along. But let's start with Mitch. What is the current state of AI and DevOps from your perspective? I feel like it's still early days, but probably every developer I know is probably using some form of AI to maybe write some code, and the DevOps teams are starting to see more of this, but they themselves are not necessarily using it. Or what's your sense of where were we?
Well, we actually looked at that question in 2022, and that was mostly anticipating where we might use AI. And interesting, we're refreshing that research and very much getting a response back, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1/3 of the folks that responded to our survey said they're using AI in their DevOps. Now, where is another question. So probably the most frequent is in copilots, code generation, assisted code development that's built into IDEs. It's very easy to acquire. It's very common. We're used to code completion, helping us in our IDEs. So it's a bit of a natural extension. But there's a lot of anticipation about where we will use it. Some people are starting to use it in testing, test generation, documenting tests, documenting code, things like that, and then kind of branching out into other parts of the SDLC. Many of the products that we use either have or beginning to use increasing amounts of AI, the most recent one being generative AI. A lot of products already had some use of machine language, or machine learning, or AI models that they may have already been using. So I think we're just going to continue to see a lot more of that.
Do you think we're starting to see some segmentation where I might feel comfortable using ChatGPT to write a script for me for something, whether I'm connecting to some sort of infrastructure as code versus maybe not so much for business logic? I mean, is there a little bit of a hierarchy starting to emerge, do you think?
I think there are a couple of hierarchies. That is one of them, is how much domain-specific knowledge do you need to have in order to generate code for that? Now, if you say, create me, write me some code that will take this image, do this processing on it, extract this information, save this metadata into a JSON file or whatever it might be. Those are all kind of logical things that, regardless of what the business logic is. But if you said, apply our algorithm for optimizing the presentation of resorts to book a room at, that might not be so, easily done. I think the other sort of hierarchy is a lot of folks newer to programming are easily jump into ChatGPT or Copilot type products and say, generate this for me, see what it is, let me experiment with it. Folks that have been doing this for a while longer are not quite as trusting, if you will. They really want to see generated code working, review it, make sure it's something that they're comfortable releasing. So I think it's accelerating people's learning, maybe on the earlier curve of development, and we'll increasingly see developers use it more and more, but there's a trust factor that has to get there before we're going to really let it kind of take off and do a lot of the work for us.
Do you think that we need to aggregate a lot of the telemetry data that's floating around in our various DevOps platforms first before we get to have the benefits of Gen AI applied to the DevOps workflow itself versus actually the writing of the code on the front end? But it seems to me we never have enough DevOps professionals, but just throwing a publicly trained LLM at some of these things could do more harm than good unless we have some sort of data to train it with that's relevant, right?
Well, what is the garbage in, garbage out? You don't know it may not be garbage, but whatever went in is going to come out in some form. And that's where we get into either smaller language models or domain specific, but also get into retrieval augmented generation, which is essentially encapsulating your specific data in essence in front of a model that might be a publicly available model, so you're going to have data leakage. I think most organizations are in the beginning steps of kind of learning about how to do those things in generative AI. That said, you see vendors coming out with not just a Copilot, but kind of the next step now within the last year, since kind of ChatGPT came on the scene for most folks back in November of 2022. And you're starting to see it built into products, not just as a Copilot, but here, create a workflow for me that does this, create this. And a lot of it is how much are we providing our vendors, our technology suppliers, our specific information, what of it is anonymized and what are they using that they may already have from their models.
Do you think, therefore, the workflows are going to look something like this? I may have, there's the stuff I do, and then I have my own personal digital assistant, and that digital assistant may have 4 or 5 digital AI helpers, and they're each optimized for specific workflows, and somehow or other there'll be some level of orchestration. I kind of use the Downton Abbey metaphor sometimes. There's a head butler who's the AI assistant, and then there's a lot of other people running around downstairs that nobody ever sees to do all the real work.
Almost sounds like Jenkins back in the beginning of CI/CD, doesn't it? Or Hudson, even before that. That already is happening to some degree. Some of the larger products that, like for example, Salesforce came out with, they use multiple models, and there's kind of an arbitration layer that takes the prompt, determines what the best model to respond to that part of the prompt, then recrafts it in the way that's optimized for that specific model, and responding and bringing back the answers or the results from it that way. I think we're in the single person productivity generation of AI today when it comes to software development. It's the Copilot for me, for my development, for my writing test cases, for my analyzing data results. Really, I think the biggest benefit from AI is when we start seeing AI for teams. When AI is being used in a way that can augment how a team functions, how groups of people working together function, not just me writing a little bit better code or maybe more secured or more code, but helping us all, because it, like you said, it takes a village. It doesn't help if one of us is getting an advantage from this tool. The rest of us are still trying to work at our current pace.
Joel, I know you've been kicking around with all this AI stuff for a while. It seems to me to make it really work or customize it for any organization, I need to use some sort of RAG technique where I'm exposing some data safely to the LLM that's going to help me figure out how to take on a specific task. But what's the process of doing that? I think a lot of folks, frankly, we had a hackathon here about, 4 months ago. And we spent the first 2 days just talking about how to get the data structured without even getting anywhere near the AI DevOps workflow. And so is that where people need to start, or what's your thought about how this all is going to evolve?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. Like, we have a saying, without data, there is no AI. Like what Mitch said earlier, garbage in, garbage out. It's the same principle all over again in the new phase as well. So, I mean, like you said, bringing in data, like historically, when we say data, people always thought of it as structured data. It's in different databases, so if you will. And now in the world of RAG, in the world of, with the ChatGPT lookalike, it's all text. It's all unstructured data, whether it is documents after documents to audio, video, images, and so on. Those are all, companies have in Google Drive, in OneDrive, in SharePoint, and a whole bunch of other places distributed all over the place. And wrangling them is one of the biggest challenge to begin with, especially for a corporate type environment, one you can imagine. It's not just bringing the data and say, hey, everybody have access to this data. I can ask questions against it. That's just not going to work. If each one of us in the enterprise or corporate environment have different access to different data. So it's not just bringing in the data, which is, again, a large volume, and structuring and making sure we can take it from there to ask the right question, but also what data do I have access when just in time to be able to use that as a context and as a resource to send it to a ChatGPT like tool, even if it is an Azure AI endpoint, being able to send it to there and getting it for just in time. That is one of the biggest challenges we see.
Yeah. Justin, I know that you're not necessarily working in the DevOps space. It's kind of just one use case, but let me ask you this. Is AI the best thing that ever happened to data management, or the worst thing that ever happened to data management? Because I feel like you can look at it both ways.
Yeah, I think it could be both for sure. So what Joel was just saying, the security is the most important thing that we see, making sure that the AI does not explain content that isn't relevant or isn't shared with someone already as part of its answer is definitely key. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that it's returning relevant results, right? If we give a huge pile of information, the AI can potentially hallucinate, if you will, and come up with an answer that isn't relevant. And that's kind of the reason why I say it isn't the greatest thing, right? If we have great, clean data and it works really well, then sure, it's an incredibly powerful tool. But we're still in that phase. I think I like how Mitch phrased it earlier that we're using it at an individual productivity level, where we need to make sure that the results we get are fact checked and source checked.
All right. Stephanie, welcome to the show, by the way.
Hello.
Are you seeing the same thing that Justin just said? I feel like a lot of times when we go down these AI rabbit holes, the first thing we encounter are these data management headaches. And some organizations manage it better than others. Other people, I would say, would never get a good housekeeping seal of approval for the way they've been managing data all these years. So you're in charge of customer success. What are you seeing from other customers as they kind of go down this path? What is the first thing that they kind of hit as an obstacle?
That's a huge concern, is should all the data be perfect before you start implementing Gen AI or RAG or not? And basically the best time to start was yesterday. So a lot of my customers, they see that maybe as a barrier, but also it's a really great reason to go back and maybe start doing some of that change management and start asking for more and better documentation from your teams just to help them be more productive. And I think that's a really important point about garbage data in, garbage data out. So a lot of folks have that concern. So it's good to get started on it ASAP. And then also it is important to do it in a security forward and permissions enforced way. So each individual, when they're accessing what they need to access with the RAG on top of it, I think a lot of my customers are very concerned to make sure that it's permissions enforced and that all of those other source data permissions are respected too. So I think it's good to force the conversation.
Mike, if I can jump in on this too, there's a new, well, it's not new, but it may be new to our conversation in DevOps regarding data, and that's knowledge graphs. A lot of what's interesting of what AI, and particularly generative AI, can do for us is understanding people and their connections to activities in the data that it's analyzing and it's processing. And so the use of knowledge graph that would say, well, we know Mitch, and we know, and when you say who is working on this project, if you're looking something up or trying to find out an asset or a resource, and it's knowing, okay, well, Mitch, well, he's in development and he's part of this team. He reports to Stephanie. Stephanie's leading a project on this, and that's what Mitch is working on. And that's where this is. It's in that project. So that, we all have heard of and used probably not graph databases, but this is, at least for I think the general users, the idea of a knowledge graph, understanding the connections between all the objects that we're analyzing, including people, and then security layered on top of that. That's another aspect of this, because some things you can't figure out without that information. I know, Stephanie, I think that falls into your camp really well, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So that is what powers Glean, is definitely the knowledge graph. So not only are we, security and permissions enforced, but also understanding the entire context, who is on the team, who are they interacting with. All of that information is also fed in to help add that context, which is very key.
Yeah. Joel, you want to add to that? Because sometimes, when I go talk to people, they're like, all right, how do I get data in front of this LLM? And I got to get a vector database and I got to get some search tools. And about 3 seconds later, everybody no one wants to admit that they don't really know what a vector database does. So can you just kind of walk us through some of the fundamentals of what do I got to master if I wanted to put my data in front of an LLM? What's it going to take?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned vector database. I mean, that is definitely one of the crucial component of the pipeline. But like Mitch and Stephanie mentioned, it's like, if you take it back, right? Like, vector database is just converting a corpus of text into embeddings. The intent is to be able to do similarity search and things of that nature, to be able to pinpoint and find that data. For example, if I just arbitrarily searched for a keyword, and Mike, you search for the same keyword, potentially if you just use the vector search, more likely we are about to get the same response. But going back to Mitch's problem statement, hypothetically, let's say I'm from a customer-facing role, and Mitch, for example, he's from a legal team within the organization. We both are different persona, and we have to look at it from different perspectives. And that is where tools like Glean and other things like the people search component, the pre-work done ahead of time to be able to know, who am I? Why am I asking that question? It's like going to really understand the intent of the question is far more important than just doing a vector search, if you will. And that's what attributes to the quality of the response that you get from a RAG type applications. Like, anybody can build a simple RAG. It's like, hey, I have a collection of documents, just answer from that. It will just, answer only to a certain quality. But knowing who are you and knowing your intent, that is the hard part, really. It goes to far more quality of the whole end-to-end application.
Justin, do we need to teach people how to ask questions and actually frame their intent? Because it seems to me we're just not very good at that part of it. We're good at looking stuff up, but we don't really know how to interrogate something and ask something iterative questions where we're treating that database to get to some deeper insight.
Yeah, you read my mind, Mike. I was actually just going to ask Joel to kind of maybe expand upon that too. I think there's a few answers to that. First is, yes, we need to teach people this is not search, right? It's okay to be more verbose in what you're asking for and to type in what your intention is. Just say, I need it formatted in this way. I need data that is not this old or is older than this. Those are things that help the models work really well. I think the other piece of it is, right now we have a lot of people who are using kind of generic LLMs. I'll use the term copilot just for a generic term, right? When you go to the place like that, and whether or not you're using RAG and bringing in company data or not, you have a huge scope of knowledge, and sometimes that can actually, in my experience, hurt the answer, right? We are working more with specific use cases now, and Glean is an example of this with their app platform, being able to kind of create a persona-based bot or answer, so we can give some of those contexts and just the intent right up front. So if we know this is a support bot, or if we know it's a weekly status bot, we can tell it always answer in this particular format, or you are a weekly summary assistant, or you are a support bot.
Stephanie, about that, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add there, like that's actually one of the things we find again and again, which is people for decades, like right now it's more than 2 decades, have used Google search. And that's the default response they have. They just type keywords, 2 keyword, and they expect the system to read their mind and answer based on that. And in a normal sense, in a Google response, it will just give links. It's up to you to click on links and find the answer. In a way, you feel like you got the answer. But in a chat GPT type environment where there is only one summarized response, that summarized response doesn't get what you were really thinking in your brain. Your immediate reaction is like, no, this is not good. And so that's why we have to take an extra step in teaching people. It's like, no, don't do Google search. This is not Google search. Just be conversational with the system, and that conversational helps the system to understand the angle you're coming from and be able to answer you better.
Stephanie, to that point, are you seeing people, they're just kind of playing with stuff to figure out how it works, or do people actually need to become prompt engineers and we need to send them to prompt camp so they can figure out how to frame all these prompts? And what do you see customers doing?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. I agree. I think since we are all so used to search and just keywords, a lot of us need just a little bit of education and training about it. So I'm seeing a lot of my customers who will do some basic prompt engineering 101 training to some degree. So helping folks understand the types of questions that they can ask and that they can continue having the conversation. So some folks, if you're not really familiar with generative AI, they don't even know what's possible. So even just showing them the art of the possible can make a huge impact in having folks understand how to use it. So understanding you can change the tone of something or the way that you're asking it, or you can say format it in a different way. And since we're just so used to typing some words into a search box, I think folks do need a little bit of training on it. And I also am definitely seeing my customers who have hero use cases. So really good samples to help folks get used to using it. And I think that's helping folks think outside the box, especially for folks who have not used it before.
Right. That does not mean, however, you should attempt to turn your product documentation into a Shakespearean sonnet, because it just doesn't really work out so well. But Mitchell.
Can I jump in for a second?
Sure, go ahead.
I just want to ask the rest of the panel, do you find it different when you're interacting with perhaps engineering-minded folks versus teams that are outside of engineering? Does it take a different training to say, how do you get the right answer out of it?
I would say that one of the things I see is the general user population doesn't quite realize this fast. They need to talk to a GPT type product differently than you would a Google. I think engineering mindset folks kind of see, oh, there's something else. They'll go Google it, kind of figure out how to do this a little bit more quickly. But eventually, people learn what other folks are doing. So that even in the general business, people will pick up and say, hey, that's a great, what do you call that? A prompt? Okay, send that to me. So I think eventually everybody kind of realizes that to get good usable results, you have to kind of do things a little differently.
I think if you ask any IT survey that you've ever seen, and there's always a question in there about which among your users are the most difficult to support, engineers are always at the top of that list. So I'm going to turn to our audience now for some questions here because, A, we want to encourage that behavior. But there's one right up here at the top of the list that I'm going to throw to Mitch. Essentially, I'm pulling the pin on this one and rolling it down the aisle. But, one of our attendees wants to know is, with advances in AI, will DevOps remain relevant? And I guess part of that question is just how automated is automated going to get?
I think the answer depends on whether DevOps evolves and changes or DevOps tries to stay what it is today. I think DevOps has been very good about evolving and changing and adapting. And from in my research and working with it, I think it's going to affect all parts of our software development, not just DevOps, but its ability to evolve and incorporate new capabilities, whether it's technology or techniques or processes. So I think if DevOps just stayed the way it was, we might talk about it someday like we do monolithic application architecture or something like that. But I don't see that happening at all. The DevOps culture, especially given that the people who work in that culture are software developers, testers, engineering-minded, problem solvers. They look for tools to solve their problems. So they're going to evolve the tool set and the workflow and the capabilities. So I'd say as long as you're not stuck in your ways, it'll be right there with you and helping you in the next place you want to go to.
Well, let me ask you another question that kind of is related to that. But today we see data science teams using MLOps to create AI models, which from my perspective appear to be just another different type of software artifact. So won't those just naturally flow into the DevOps workflow, because those models got to find their way to something that looks like an inference engine, and so therefore that becomes part of the whole application deployment process?
Well, so data has always been an interesting thing when it comes to data, when it comes to DevOps, because data has its own gravity, its own momentum, and how it evolves as part of a development lifecycle. You have issues with data and data structures changing as you upgrade databases and add new content to them, et cetera. In a way, you have very much the same thing with models. Think of models as like a spreadsheet is a model, right? And so you may do lots of things to that model to adapt it, change it, make it able to respond to more conditions, new criterion, how many factors it might consider. The same thing with generative AI is you're training models, and a lot of the training is about how to interpret the prompts and how to respond to those prompts. So it's in effect, you're creating the nomenclature of how to talk to that particular model. That doesn't always follow a normal DevOps lifecycle. It's not necessarily a iterative, let's push this new microservice out to production. So I think we have to learn from the AI and the data scientists who are doing data ops and ML ops about how to manage models, because they can get out of control fast, get too many of them, too many variances, and not know what's happening anymore. And how we introduce those into a DevOps lifecycle. We also have to be careful about data poisoning. We haven't talked about that, which is if you get some inaccuracies or future data is built upon. Let's say I use the wrong algorithm to calculate real estate tax, and that's been in there for 6 months, and now suddenly all this reporting that's going on in my Gen AI model is all basing that on an inaccurate calculation, but nobody knows that was an error. So we've got to kind of look at this information, the data, differently, because it's not all accounts and balances and things like that. It's a lot of just plain old written content.
Justin, can you add? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, I know Mitch mentioned data poisoning and things of that nature. I mean, like originally what we talked about, what I call it as like AI for DevOps, like as a software developer, how am I using AI to write my code, write my unit test scripts and so on. But Mitch alluded later on is what I call it as like DevOps for AI. Like even the AI workflow itself has to be DevOps. What I mean is like the data, how do I make sure the quality of the data is there? Am I using the right data in the right format? He mentioned data poisoning and so on. And then even in a traditional sense, like if you to take DevOps and let's say I need to bring my Python package, for example, from PyPy, there is supply chain attack and things of that nature when it comes to security, making sure I'm scanning the packages to make sure the right things are deployed in the right place from the infrastructure perspective. In the same sense, modeling as well is the same thing. I can just go and say, hey, I have a new Llama code or new that model and this model. I want to deploy it in my place. You can go to Hugging Face and download anything, but do you trust them? And all that kind of best practices, if you will. Like at the end of the day, when I think of DevOps, best practice becomes one of the fundamental things. All that come into play. Especially from Databricks perspective, that's one of the things that we invested a lot of time and energy to work with in the community and people of caliber to kind of put together what we call Databricks AI security framework. When you think of security, it's about risks and controls, and this is kind of divided into 55 risks and controls when you deploy AI applications, all the way from data to the end results and monitoring. So you can kind of if you're interested, you can look it up find some details there too.
Justin, I'd love to get your opinion on this. We spent the last 10 years trying to move all the data into the cloud, and we mentioned data gravity, but it seems to me that the models need to move closer to where the data is being created and consumed. So are we moving back towards we're going to bring the proverbial code to where the data is, or should we move all the data up in the cloud still, or some combination of both? What's your sense of what's the right path here? Because an old friend of mine once said, nothing good happens when you start moving data.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think that there's probably an opportunity for all of the things you just proposed, right? When we moved data to the cloud, we got much more modern interfaces and APIs, so we're able to get things to work together much better. That's really helped. I think from my perspective with automation and AI, being able to talk to something, whether it's in the same data center or the same service, wherever it is. And actually, a Glean connection right here is that we have sources of data coming in from all different places when we're asking the AI for an answer. And the ability to get that really quickly from all those sources, regardless of where they live, is critical. But I don't think that means that we're going to have the model living right next to the data, perhaps. But I'm not an architect in that capacity, so take it with my 2 cents.
Joel, you got any thoughts about where that data should be?
Well, actually, I mean, yeah, and like historically, it's a funny thing because everybody comes with a pure intent. It's like, hey, if only I can carol the data to live in all one place, we'll have better structure, better governance, better management. I have seen this again and again, it failed. It's just hard to bring everybody to one place. So people will have structured data in one place, unstructured data in different place. At the end of the day, you need a structure and framework to bring them all together, regardless of different locations, different formats, and things of that nature, which is, again, one of the tools like Glean does a very good job. And regarding the model locality, I would rather have an abstraction layer, like, hey, these are my data. This is how I'm going to manage the model perspective, if you will. And I think Mitch alluded this a bit earlier as well. Like, like we are still in this personal type of RAG phase where I have all this collection of data. I can send it to a RAG, which is still, we are using a very general purpose LLM model, if you will. And eventually, let's say you have a genomics use case, or you have a customer 360 use case, or a different data application use case, you have to fine tune your model on top of your data knowledge that is closer to you. And that will be the next phase. And that, as a matter of fact, from a Databricks perspective, we see a lot of customers starting to do that. What we call is like fine tuning. You take a general purpose model and you take your data, bring them together, you have a new model. And that has a significant higher quality than just using a general purpose model for your domain knowledge. And as a matter of fact, that is how you differentiate because data is your treasure. That is something unique you have in your enterprise. Nobody else has it. If you're just using a general purpose LLM again and again and again, how are you differentiating yourself? And so as the next iteration, we will see a lot of companies taking their data, taking a general purpose model. Like, as a matter of fact, even in Databricks, we have DPRX. You can take that model and then fine tune it and create your own unique model, and then use your AI ops or AI DevOps to deploy the model for your next set of internal customers to ask questions again. So that's how we see the future as well.
All right, Mitch, we have a question from the audience that kind of is coming your way, but it kind of goes to the heart of the topic, right? Can you explain how AI can assist in identifying and resolving issues faster in a CI/CD pipeline, while also automating repetitive tasks to streamline their workflow? And I think underneath that question is a lot of times Gen AI doesn't give the same answer twice the same way. So how do you do that when we're trying to do the same thing over and over again?
Well, to hit the last question, there's a temperature setting in Gen AI that we don't always often use, but essentially it's, so how far off the reservation will you let Gen AI go in terms of its non-deterministic answers? So you can both train models and also use settings to help kind of rein in some of those answers. I think a couple of things. I mean, a really simple example, the kind of one of the first experiences I had with Gen AI was one of our folks reached out to me and said, hey, this piece of code isn't working. It keeps failing in the middle of it. And I popped it into ChatGPT and said, find any errors that are in this code. And it actually said, here you go. You have this in the wrong order. Reorient it this way. By the way, if you want to add some more error handling, here it is. So I sent it back to him. He said, that was great. How did you figure that out? That's an example of solving a problem. So the same thing can happen in our workflows, especially if we have models that have access either through RAG or training the models, access to our DevOps exhaust, our data exhaust that comes as part of all of our work in whatever stage, whether it's coming from the repository or security testing tool, software testing tool, the build integration process, deployment, et cetera. Having that information gives, AI feeds off of data. It's kind of one of those aliens that just craves data, especially machine learning. So the more of that we have, that we can give it as a base to work from, as opposed to just a general set of knowledge, I think that will be very helpful. So I think we'll be able to ask, just like you can in some operations tools today, say, has anybody created an automation for this problem? Yes, Stephanie did. Here you go. Here's what she used, and that was created by a Gen AI tool. I think we'll see very much like that already. Instead of me going and searching in a directory or a package manager or something to say, I just need this, something that does this. Imagine searching PyPy by just saying, I'm looking for something that kind of does this, but looks a little bit like this package. It's got this feature in this package. What could I use that would help me do that? That'd be great. I'd love that, because I don't know all those packages to go searching through everything.
Yeah. Joel, one of our attendees is looking for a little advice, and it kind of goes around this. Let's say I did put an AI model into my DevOps workflow. How do I know how to keep it effective and accurate and consistent, because it will drift over time, or it might drift. And as far as I know, it's not easy to kind of rip and replace or update the AI model. I have to kind of take the whole thing out and start over again. So in the land of DevOps, we have version control, but we're not sure we have version control for AI models. But I don't know what your sense is of how would we practically manage that?
Sure. I mean, as a matter of fact, we do have version control on the AI models as well, especially if you're fine-tuning with your own data. I mean, even if you think about it, we have, ChatGPT 3.5, 4, now we have 4.0. So in a way, we do have versions. And fun fact, I think, 2020? As a matter of fact, I did a webinar about model drift and how do you manage model drift, especially from Databricks perspective, on how MLflow as a tool helps you to manage all this with ease. But the bottom line is the fact is the same, which is the quality will degrade over time. The reason being the nature of data changes over time. Even as a personal preference, right? Let's say if you like these types of music, these types of cuisines, culturally we evolve over time, and demographic wise, everybody's preferences also changes over time. We have new set of things coming in. We forget about old things. So we have to upkeep our models per se. We have new, even if you look at from an industry perspective, your own unique data, you have new learnings all the time. You have to incorporate them in your own domain of your model. So the best way is to do quality references, you take your model and you do inference checks, and you can validate the quality over time, is it still curating to that level that we need? And then being able to periodically update the models, so to speak, and then, redeploy that new model. And you could do A/B testing, all the old things still apply over here as well. A/B testing and, model quality and the model references, you can still do that. So in a way, you're doing exactly as what you did before, except that instead of deploying a package, you're deploying a model, and the other things still remain the same.
Stephanie, arguably, DevOps is just one type of workflow, and it has bottlenecks like every other kind of workflow. But have you seen with the introduction of AI among customers that the workflows are actually being streamlined, or does it just wind up getting more complex because there's more moving parts than ever?
That's a very interesting question. I would say there's a lot of workflows that can be optimized even outside of engineering, but the idea is understanding what are the repetitive tasks that all of us knowledge workers are doing that maybe generative AI can help us with on an ongoing basis. So things like regularly reviewing your own performance or your own work. So looking at the work that you've done or accomplished. So using Gen AI to help write performance reviews, just when you think about all of the general applications that knowledge workers could use Gen AI for, I think we're definitely still in those early stages and discovery periods, but we're seeing a lot of productivity gains, I would say. We're definitely from the perspective that every knowledge worker will need some type of Gen AI assistant in the future to help them do their work. So even for me personally, it helps automate the things that I do every single day, things that maybe I don't necessarily need to do by hand. So starting to think, if every knowledge worker can start to think, how can I use Gen AI to improve my work life? I think that's going to definitely serve them.
All right. Justin, are you seeing the same thing? Because sometimes I'm overly simplistic and I'm just like, all right, here's all the crap I don't like doing. I'm going to give that to AI, and here's all the stuff I like doing, so I'll keep that. I mean, is it that simple?
I don't think it's that simple. I think we're seeing people that are using AI in workflows that would be really time consuming, right? Stephanie mentioned productivity. I think that when we see users that are unsure where to begin, and the number of results they get in a traditional search or even just asking a colleague is overwhelming. That's a place where people are really starting to value some of this AI capability within the tools we offer. And I think of it like, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain, almost like onboarding a new employee, right? You may have a mentor or a coach or a teammate that kind of is your go-to person, but you also have this kind of second sidekick that can deliver all those same things, and potentially even with the value of being trained on kind of company culture or company standards, so that the answers are coming back, really relevant.
All right. Yeah. Justin mentioned the word culture. So I don't know if somebody want to add to that for a second there. No. All right.
Well, I'll add a little bit more on the workflow aspect of it too, Mike. It's like, if you think about it as a knowledge worker, I still believe vast majority of the time we are spending time to look information up. Like, how do I do X? How do I do Y? How do I do Z? How do I collaborate with this person? What does that team does? And all that stuff. So which is where I still believe like the number one thing, the bigger portion of the thing you're trying to solve is with tools like Glean, where instead of me spending hours and hours and hours going through 100 different documentation of sort, trying to just distill that information, this tool allows you to peruse through and get to that. But as part of the workflow, it doesn't stop there. For me, it's about taking action, finding information to taking action, right? So one simple could be, I found all these things. Oh, that team can help. Now the next one is like, oh, you need to submit a form to get help from that team. It's like, why? Like, I literally worked with the tool and a system to find all this information. I need to be able to click one button because that AI underneath already knows all that about me as to what I'm looking for. And that, perhaps like the next iteration of Glean like tool will be able to click one button and say, okay, I've submitted this request to this team and they will follow up. And from that team's perspective, my historical, what I was looking for and all that thing is already captured as part of it. So it gives a lot more context and it makes their workflow also much simpler. So that continuity and the lineage of information flow as part of these workflows, I believe in the future will be a lot more to simplify and make everybody's, workflow easier.
Stephanie, we started talking about the village that it takes to make all this work. And we have a question here about culture. So it basically says, how do I get all these data scientists, developers, and operations teams, and let's throw in some security people while we're at it, and data engineers to kind of work together in some sort of cohesive fashion? What are you seeing customers doing that makes sense besides, I guess, short of throwing everybody in a room and locking the door until somebody sees sense, but maybe there's a more intelligent way about going after that?
There's definitely a few ways that you can approach this. So there's the change management perspective. So thinking about training, office hours, enablement, awareness. Those types of things are something that a company can decide top down about how to do. And then I also think each team can think about it individually. So if you're the head of a department, if you're the head of sales, if you're the head of some other department, you need to start thinking about how can Gen AI really improve our workflows and how can things work here specifically. So we've also seen some success in just going in with particular hero use cases. So to the earlier point, I think both Mitch and Justin were speaking to, engineers are much more likely to pick up Gen AI as a new tool. They think, okay, I can see immediately how this will benefit me. So I think that they're innovators in that type of way, but there are other folks who might just be used to Googling for things, and they're going to need a little bit more help. So to do so, I'm seeing some customers do some type of embedded deployment where it's basically like the only option or the only way for them to do things, or meeting people where they're working. So if they are working in Slack a lot, embedding some workflows into Slack, or if they're in Jira or in other tools. So I think that can help too. So going to people where they are working, training and enablement can also help too.
Justin, you guys have probably encountered these issues. What did you guys do?
Yeah, I echo what Stephanie just said. That meeting people where they're at was key. We're heavily invested in Slack, and folks love that. So that's one key area. I think the other thing to think about is that I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. There was something you said, Stephanie, that made me think of this. Sorry, I'm blanking on my own thought here.
All right, well.
Yeah, sorry guys, come back to me.
No worries. There's a question here for Mitch. We hear a lot about AI ops. Is DevOps essentially morphing into AI ops from here? I mean, will we bring together all of these ITSM and DevOps folks under the AI ops banner and all join arms and live happily ever after?
I'm not sure if it's all subsuming into one. I mean, it's a family of principles, right? Of using the idea of platforms and automation and units of work and how we work on software, how we work with data, right? So I think AI ops is similar to data ops, where it's about managing data, the data models, the provenance of data, and generations or versions of data, versioning of data, things like that, and DevOps in terms of its own AI elements. They're about how workflow travels across all those things. So is it one DevOps AI to rule them all? No, I think it's all working in concert with other things, because each respective area kind of has its own unique things, but they're just applying some of the same ideas and principles. Yeah, my belief is, earlier in my career, I went through what we called the religious methodology wars, which is the right methodology to do software development by, and I realized how useless that really was. And what really tends to happen is what's happened with Agile and with DevOps and platform engineering is the need creates, and out of that arises an approach. And we're in an era where people are much more incented and want to work together and see the efficiencies and the gains and the productivity of doing that. So while we may see kind of platform engineering, take a leap here and there, is that going to negatively impact DevOps? No, because now we've got better things there to help us all achieve things. Same thing with AI ops.
Joel, to that question, should every DevOps team start thinking about adding a data engineer to the team? I mean, or does somebody on the DevOps team need to just learn how to become a data engineer and play that role?
Well, as a matter of fact, we see that in many organizations. Like, I'm part of a customer-facing team from Databricks. So we see many customers where traditionally they are DevOps. They're like, hey, I do infrastructure as a code, like IAC and other things. And that eventually translates into, okay, infrastructure for an application to now, like for a software application, to infrastructure for a data application. And now we are moving into infrastructure for an AI application. So in the sense, yes, it's all about, at the end of the day, I think Mitch alluded to, the format wars and other wars. At the end of the day, as in any enterprise, you need to focus on your business objective, your business ROI. At the end of the day, working with that as a principle, and then adjusting and course correcting and working together to how to achieve that. That should be the main goal. And therefore, yes, you work with your data engineering team. You eventually want to work with your AI team, model team, and your business team, and then bring it all together.
Justin, this may come as a surprise to you, but developers occasionally will just pull data to go test their code without any regard to how sensitive that data may be. So is there a way to think about managing sensitive data in these processes that we're overlooking, or we need to think harder about?
Yeah, I think that we've addressed that with primarily with training, but also with considering how we're bringing on tooling, getting that kind of stakeholder buy-in, and really going through our SecOps team, making sure that we've done research on is the model that's being used going to be storing, learning, training, sharing with other customers. Obviously, we're not looking for things like that, but really, I think that we're having pretty good success there. I don't think we're seeing a lot of pushback once those things are checked off.
All right, cool.
Hey, I also want to follow up if I can.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I caught my train of thought that I lost earlier. We were talking a little bit about meeting folks where they're at, and I think that one of the things with AI that's been really eye-opening is that the barrier entry to a user to try it is so low, and the responses are so quick that it's really quick to fail. So getting the end user to try it once isn't hard. It's more the time spent to do all the things we just talked about, right? What's the security checkoff? What's the what's the right model? What's the right approach? Can we embed it in the platform? That was kind of the tail of what I was thinking earlier.
Mitchell, are we overly obsessed about generative AI and ignoring predictive AI and causal AI and all these other different types of AIs that are out there that are just part of the DevOps workflow, and we maybe should figure out which model to use for what purpose when?
Well, I think we should probably remember we've been deploying neural network models and machine learning algorithms for quite some time. A lot of products use those technologies and have for a number of years, primarily because of the availability of processing power, but also all the data that they can benefit from. Gen AI, to Justin's approach, the approachability of Gen AI is part of what's making it taken off. Anybody can go to a website, try it, and use it. It's kind of like the cloud. If I had a browser and a credit card, I could start up a server, right? We're kind of that way with AI now. You don't have to learn PyTorch or TensorFlow or some other kind of programming, really technical thing that the most common users won't need to know. Now, I think that's what is exciting about it is the natural language interface to Gen AI. And that's what makes it so easy for folks to use. And as they craft their prompt engineering skills and they use different models, that'll continue to evolve. So I think Gen AI is not the tool for the solution for every problem. Most definitely, you have to kind of really look at what it's geared, what it's been built for, and how all the parameters tying to words and their neighbors and their usage, and that lets you kind of generate that text. Of course, we have multimodal too as an interface for that. I think the thing take away from Gen AI in terms of how that's going to impact us, I think that's the next user experience for our application, just like we've had web and mobile and kind of, the Amazon Siri-ish, which is somewhat of an assistant interface. I think we're going to see a lot of applications built around a Gen AI type of user experience.
Cool. We have come to that part of the show where we asked everybody beforehand to think through what their prediction might be for the coming year, because, well, it's anybody's guess at this point. So I'm going to start with Joel. What's your prediction as you kind of look out in your little crystal ball there for the coming year? What do you think how will this all evolve?
A few things. One is, like I mentioned earlier, we have been very honed into the unstructured data using LLM, blending the structured and unstructured in a more meaningful way will come in. But it's also, I call it like decomposing. Like, let's say you have your intent and you need to serialize into different steps, and to decompose, like I need to step A, step B, step C, and then that's what will get me to the intent, right? To solve the intent. So we will see more and more energy put into being able to resolve to that state, rather than being one question, one answer. Oh, it's not able to answer the question type thing. But also, I still think eventually we will converge into, I think, similar to what Mitch alluded. We will no longer be kind of a keyboard and mouse type interface. We will eventually translate into more of a communication with the system in the natural language type of interface. That's how my kids are starting to interface with the system already. So as the new generation comes up, for them it will be like so natural. The keyboard and mouse will look so foreign to them. So that's kind of how I think about it.
It might even be a voice interface where I just go in and say, tell me the 3 things that are likely to get me fired and what should I do about it, right? Stephanie, want to take a guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Joel touched upon this earlier. I think Gen AI is incredible, but where the future may be is more so in that idea of actions or agents, or the idea that it can maybe start taking action based upon what you have asked it to do. So I think that's going to be a really exciting area of AI to watch.
All right. Justin, what are you thinking?
Well, number one, I echo what Joel said about the kids growing up with it. My kids ask their smart speaker every morning what's the weather when they're getting dressed and what should I put on, and it's just a whole different way of thinking. So I think that's definitely going to happen. But my takeaway or prediction is really shifting from transactional, where we're asking on purpose and intentfully, to something that can kind of watch what we're doing and make suggestions, almost if you think of Clippy years ago, right? But much better. We're hopefully going to have capabilities that say you're wasting time or you're doing duplicate effort or something. Here's a mechanism that I've come up with that would address that, and you didn't even have to ask for it.
All right. Mitch, I know you have a few predictions, but share.
Well, I give you the one about the user experience. I think in the next 18, 24 months, we're going to see some pretty significant shifts start in how we create software as the models get better at creating the kinds of software, secure software, resilient software. As that gets refined and we move past the individual developer or individual user productivity aid that it is today, I think we're going to be think about things we might script today. I need a script to go set this up on my CI/CD server. Well, I just have it generate it for you. It's like those other 3 that we wrote last week, right? I think a lot of the drudgery work, kind of the infrastructure maintenance that we do in our tool chains or in our workflows and how we create those things, a lot of that's going to be automated because it's created through generative AI. I think the other big change is AI is a contact sport. The only way you learn it is to use it. So if you haven't gone and played with PyTorch or tried to use the API into ChatGPT-4 or whatever it might be, or Llama 3, get involved. That's the way you'll learn it, because then you'll see what things you might be able to do and leverage it. And I think it's going to be a required skill for every software developer and test professional, architect, and security engineer, period.
All right. Well, here's my prediction. This time next year, we'll be right back here having the same conversation because it's never ending. We'll go from there. Hey, guys, thanks for being on the show and spending some time with us. I'm going to hand it back to Cody.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And thank you to the rest of our panelists as well for joining us. It's been such a pleasure to hear all of your perspectives today. Before we do close things out, I do just want to ask our audience to click on the survey in the resources section on the left-hand side of your screen. We really appreciate your input on these surveys, and they will also make you eligible for our $50 Amazon gift card giveaway. So please do let us know your feedback there. Another reminder, our session today was recorded and we will be sending it to you via email here shortly. And finally, I would like to once again thank Justin, Joel, Stephanie, Mitch, and Mike for being here with us today. We appreciate everyone spending their time. Now for our audience, we appreciate you being here with us as well. We hope to see you at a future Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye.